In today's video, we're going to talk about what is probably the biggest debate in the photography industry, which is DSLR versus mirrorless. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. And if this is your first time here, my name is Dan Quintero. I'm a commercial photographer based in Sydney, and I make videos to help you with your photography. And today we're going to talk about something that gets debated quite passionately in the photography industry, and that is whether you should go for a DSLR camera or a mirrorless camera. So which one is the best one? And look, if you searched on the internet, there's probably already hundreds of videos that talk about this. So why do we need another video? Well, two reasons. The first one is that I wanted to give you a different perspective, and that is the perspective of a working photographer. Because I think some of the features that get pushed by camera manufacturers in their latest and greatest cameras may not be as important as you think to a working photographer. And the second reason is that I wanted to correct a perception that I think that gets put out by a lot of photographers with large YouTube channels, and that is that professional photographers are constantly upgrading their equipment. That's just simply not true. Photographers do not upgrade their equipment on a yearly basis or even every couple of years. We run businesses, and you can't run a business that way. So we work with the equipment that we have, and we use it until it breaks or it doesn't do something that you need, and then you go out and buy a camera that does that. But we're not constantly upgrading equipment. That is something that gets portrayed, I think, by some of these large YouTube channels. And you have to remember that a lot of these photographers that pass on that message are actually sponsored by camera manufacturers. And so they get their equipment for free. But in the real world, it doesn't happen like that. So now let's go through the differences between the two systems, and let's see what's what and how it actually affects you as a professional photographer. Okay, so the biggest difference between the two systems really is going to be in the viewfinder. On a DSLR, you've got an optical viewfinder, which means when you're looking through there, you're actually seeing what the lens sees, and that's what the mirror is there for. Whereas on a mirrorless system, you can actually see a little screen inside of the viewfinder. And that basically doubles up or duplicates what you can see in the back screen. So both of them are showing the same information. Now, having a digital image in your viewfinder gives you a bunch of different advantages because it is a digital image. And so you can superimpose information over the top of it that is really useful. So for example, you could have a histogram, which is really useful for exposing your image. You can also have your highlight warning system, like your blinkers, for example. You can put that. So as you're looking through the viewfinder, you can see all that information without having to put the camera down and look at the back of the screen. But by far the biggest advantage of a mirrorless system is a thing called exposure simulation. And what that means is that as you look through the viewfinder, you can already see what your exposure looks like, okay? So you can see in here, and just keep in mind that whatever is shown in the back of this screen here is what is also being displayed inside of the viewfinder. So I can look at my exposure and decide that if it's too dark, then I can always brighten it up, okay? Or if it's too bright, I can darken it down. So it means that I'm seeing what the photo is going to look like ahead of time, or the exposure, and then all I got to do is just push the button and it will take the photograph. There's no need for me to look at the screen after I take the shot, as you do on a DSLR, because that's what you do in a DSLR. You take the picture, you look at the back of the screen. If it's underexposed or overexposed, you correct and you take another photo, and so on. With a mirrorless system, you know what that photo is going to look like ahead of time, and that's a tremendous advantage. Now, something to keep in mind is that if you're using strobes or flash, then exposure simulation is not going to work, because obviously the camera doesn't know what flash you have, and the light won't go off until you actually take the shot. So there's no way for the camera to know what that photo is going to look like. And so for that reason, you need to turn it off when you're using flash or strobe of any kind. On top of that, if you are working with strobes and in an environment like, say, a studio, then the settings on your camera are going to look a little different than if you're shooting with ambient light. So I'll give you an example. A typical settings could be something like, say, 1/200th of a second at f8 at ISO 100. Now, in a typical environment using just ambient light, if you had your camera set to those settings and you look through the viewfinder, you're probably not going to see anything. You're just going to see black, because there's just not enough ambient light to register an image. And so it means that when you look through the viewfinder, you're not going to see anything, which means you can't compose your shot because you can't see the scene. You can't see what you're focusing on. And so for that reason, you have to turn it off. And at that point, essentially what you have is you're going back to a DSLR, except that now you've got an electronic viewfinder rather than an optical viewfinder. And you have to keep in mind that I don't care how good your electronic viewfinder is, it's never going to be as good as an optical one, because the optical one is the real thing and there's no limitation with megapixels and there's no lag, and it's just going to be a lot clearer than any electronic viewfinder. Okay, so let's talk about batteries, because this one is a big difference between the two systems. With a DSLR, obviously, that is going to get you much further on one battery. And the reason for that is it's quite obvious. There's a lot more electronics in a mirrorless system because it has to drive two screens. So the camera cannot do anything until it's actually powered on. On a DSLR system, you can still look through the viewfinder and compose a shot, use the zoom lens, zoom in, zoom out, even while the camera is off, because that mirror there is giving you a throughput view of what the lens sees, and the mirror doesn't need any power because it's just a mirror. Whereas on a mirrorless system, obviously without that mirror, then the camera needs to be powered on for you to be able to just look through the viewfinder. Even if you're not actually shooting, just looking through the viewfinder will require power to the camera. And so for that reason, mirrorless systems tend to go through batteries a little bit quicker. Now, technology with batteries has come a long way, and the batteries are getting definitely better and more efficient. However, I still think that you can pull more usage out of one battery on a DSLR system when you're comparing it to a similar type of camera that is a mirrorless system. So as a rule, typically what I do if I'm shooting somewhere where I'm outside of a studio, I'm shooting on location, I will normally have twice as many batteries for a mirrorless system than I do for the DSLR systems. Now, if you're working in an environment where you've got power, such as a studio, then it doesn't really matter, because you can just bring a charger with you, and as you use up the batteries, all you got to do is just take a fresh one, put the old one in the charger, and you can just keep rotating them. Or better still, you can do what I do, which is I run the cameras off the mains systems, and then I don't have to worry about batteries at all. Okay, so let's talk about lenses now, because this is a really big advantage of the mirrorless system. So you can take pretty much any lens that has ever been produced by any manufacturer, and you can attach that lens to pretty much any mirrorless system using an adapter. So for example, let's say that you've always wanted to shoot with the Canon EF 85mm 1.2, but you've got a Sony camera system. So you can take a Canon EF lens and you can mount it to a Sony mirrorless system using an adapter. And these adapters are so good, they work so well that it almost looks like they were dedicated for each other, so that they were both made by the same manufacturer. And because of that, the mirrorless system not only has access to the new lenses, but also this ecosystem of used lenses from other manufacturers. Okay, so let's talk about the size of the camera now, because this one is one that gets pushed quite hard by camera manufacturers. Now, I can tell you now that a smaller camera does not actually make it a better camera when you are a professional photographer. So this camera here is one that I love. This camera, it's a little Olympus EM5. I carry this with me everywhere and I'll take it on trips. But this is not a camera that I would use on a professional set. That's not to say that the camera is not capable of producing images that are of professional quality, but the camera itself is not laid out for me to work efficiently. So the buttons, for starters, are too close together, and they have to be close because the camera body is tiny, which makes it great for traveling, but not when you're working in a set. And just to put things in perspective, I want to show you a photograph here of my 5D Mark IV and my R5C, which are comparable cameras. Now you can see that the R5C is a little bit smaller, but it's not really that much smaller. It's not the massive difference that people make it out to be. So that's just something to keep in mind. By contrast, the first camera that I gravitate to when I'm working professionally is my 1DX Mark II. Now, if you compare this camera here with this camera here, you can see the size difference. This one's absolutely massive, but this camera is designed to work in a professional environment. One of the things that you'll notice is that there's loads and loads of buttons. It can have more buttons because it's bigger. The buttons, more importantly, can be further apart from each other. So in here, the buttons are so close together, you probably can't see that, but hopefully that's focusing. Not sure if it is, but the buttons are so close together that it is very easy to, by accident, push the wrong button. And it just doesn't have enough buttons. With this one here, it's very easy to develop sort of a memory of what's what. It's a little bit like typing almost. I don't have to take my eye off the viewfinder in order to know which button does what. And I can push any button here because they're nice and further apart than they are on that camera. And also you'll notice that the buttons are also in here, which is the same layout. So if I turn the camera this way, it's exactly the same layout in here as it is when I've got the camera in that orientation. So this is a massive camera. However, you will notice that with the professional cameras from Sony, Nikon, Canon, all of those big manufacturers give you the option to either add an extension grip like this one here, or the camera already comes with the grip, right? So this is actually built into the camera here. And it's there for a reason. Professional photographers tend to prefer to use larger cameras because also not only the button layout, but they're just easier to use. You can put a much larger battery that will last all day, okay? And they're just engineered to work in a professional environment. Now, when it comes to weight, there is definitely an advantage for the mirrorless system. As you can see here, I've got my 5D Mark IV and my R5C, both have a battery in them, but you can see how much lighter the R5C is. But more importantly, the lenses designed for mirrorless systems tend to be lighter. And so when you combine the lens and the camera and they're both lighter, then what it means is that potentially it could be the difference between you being able to travel with an extra lens. Because typically when we carry our equipment on the plane, it's not so much the size of your bag. Airlines are more concerned with the weight of your bag. And so this is somewhere where, or something that the mirrorless system can definitely help us with. I'm just going to touch on autofocus. Now, both systems, both a DSLR and a mirrorless system, use different types of autofocus systems. On a DSLR, you've got focus points, which are very accurate and very fast. However, there's a limitation of how many you have, depending on the camera that you have. Whereas on a mirrorless system, it uses a different type of like a phase contrast type of system in order to be able to focus. Now, typically that's not been as accurate or as fast as the ones on the DSLR systems. However, in recent releases with the new cameras, that has gotten pretty much on par to the DSLR. So really, when it comes to that, there's not a lot of differences between the two. I mean, like I said, they work differently, but the results are pretty much the same. And I'll just expect really that the mirrorless systems are going to develop further to become even faster and even more accurate. On top of that, there's certain photography jobs where autofocus is not used and you're going to focus manually, such as in product photography. So really, when it comes to that, there's nothing really between the two systems. So when it comes to price, the advantage is definitely going to lean towards the DSLR system. And that's just because people want the latest and greatest. And so camera manufacturers can charge more for that because there is just more demand for that. But if you're looking for your first camera, then you are going to get more value for money out of a DSLR system than you are out of a mirrorless system. You could buy a professional body and a professional lens in the DSLR space that probably costs the same amount of money as something that is maybe intermediate in the mirrorless system. So you're definitely going to get more for your money in the DSLR space. Okay, so let's try and untangle all of this information and come up with some sort of conclusion. Now, before we do that though, if you are finding this video useful, I would really appreciate it if you could click the like button and also consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. I make videos like this to help you with your photography every week. So if you don't want to miss out on any of those, make sure to click the subscribe button and the notification bell, and that way you'll be notified when I upload a new video. So what does all this information mean? Well, hopefully I've been able to show you that it doesn't really matter whether you go for a DSLR type of camera or a mirrorless system. Sure that the mirrorless system is going to have a few extra features. However, The mirrorless system is going to make things easier for you. That's what you're paying for, really. Things like exposure simulation are going to show you before you take the photograph, whether your photograph is underexposed or overexposed. And you may not necessarily understand why that's happening. So in a way, it's doing things for you that may actually stand in the way of you developing your skills as a photographer. At the end of the day, both systems do exactly the same thing. They produce a digital file. So it doesn't matter which system you go for. In my opinion, I would still lean towards the DSLR system because it means that I can get a much better camera and much better optics than I could in the mirrorless space for exactly the same amount of money. And having a camera that doesn't do everything for you, I think is going to help you in the long term to develop your skills. But anyway, what do you think? Do you agree with me or not? Just let me know in the comment section below. And look, if you have any questions about anything that I covered here today, leave them in the comment section. That is the best place to get in touch with me. Otherwise, of course, you can reach me through any of the usual social media channels. You're going to find all the links in the description below. But that is everything that I have for you today. Again, please don't forget to click the like button. I hope you enjoyed this video. I want to thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.